Welcome to episode 184 of the Women of the Military podcast. This week, my guest is Wendi Ray. Wendi served in the Army and shared her experience of serving in the military, and one of the parts that she really opened up about was having a miscarriage. Wendi really struggled when she had her miscarriage. The experience led her to hate her body and herself. She blamed herself for losing her child and struggled with the emotions that go along with having a miscarriage. She tried to stuff that pain down, but in the end finally reached out for help through the Military One Source Crisis Line. There she was able to get help and move on. I'm really glad that Wendi was able to share her story and be so open and honest about her experience, and I loved having a chance to be on her podcast, Beyond the Military podcast for military women, and I will link to that episode in the show notes so you can check it out if you haven't had a chance to listen to it yet. But let's get started with this week's interview. Welcome to the show, Wendi. I'm excited to have you on Women of the Military. After I was on Beyond the Military, I'm excited to have you here and get to share your story. So let's start with, why did you decide to join the military?
Yeah, Amanda, thank you so much for having me. And so I really wasn't even interested in the military until my junior year in high school, when I realized that I had nothing else to do for my electives as I was getting ready to graduate and really start applying for colleges, because I wanted to go to college. I just didn't know for what and really didn't know where to start. I'm from a very small town in Florida, and it was just very hard to plan and even consider any profession. So I then realized that there was this thing called ROTC, and I didn't realize that it was specifically, to prepare you for leadership and even maybe join the military. So I was spontaneous. I was an only child at the time. Actually, my mom was about to have my little baby sister, but still grew up as an only child. And I'm like, what can I do that's different, challenging, and even, mentally challenging, physically and mentally challenging? And so it was JROTC. And I signed up. And immediately I was like, whoa, why am I here? Like, this is not for me, too many rules, and I have to wear a uniform. And then within a week or so of actually taking the class, the actual elective, I realized that this wasn't too bad. And I'm like, oh, I'll consider it. And so I'm looking for colleges, I'm looking for things to do. And I get signed up because I was, I'm still pretty short, but I was pretty small and short at the time. And they're like, oh no, we would love to have you on a Ranger team because we need someone that's fast with the ropes. I can't remember now what the ropes are, but I'm like, okay, I'll try it out. If it's going to get me in shape, I'll do it. So fast forward, I fall in love with the program. I get competitive. I'm a part of this team. I was really never into sports. So that's really when, this whole teamwork started for me. And so I'm looking for colleges. I'm trying to figure my life out at 16, going into 17. And my first sergeant at the time, JROTC, he said, he was a retired Army guy. And he was like, hey, have you considered a military college since you like, this program a lot, JROTC? Maybe you can actually go into an ROTC program and, consider the military. And I'm like, that's a great point. No one in my family has joined the military. Talked to my parents about the military. They immediately said no. And I'm like, okay, that just because they said no, I'm definitely going to find a way to get in. And so at that time, I didn't know, but I was really stubborn. And, when anyone was like, no, you can't do it, because that's actually what my dad said. He's like, that's for boys. You are not a boy. You are, you're a girl. You need to go, figure something else out that you really think you're going to do. And so for me, it was kind of like, okay, this is a challenge, and I love this team that I'm in. I love the program. I love everything that they're doing. So of course, I then find a recruiter within our mall area where, all the recruiters would come and really want to recruit you, mainly the seniors. But at that time, this was 2007, they were recruiting for I think it was called a split option. So long story short, I signed up. I convinced my dad. I sold him on this idea that it's going to be free college, and I was going to be, very disciplined and all these things that came with the military. So after a couple months of the recruiter and I convincing my parents, he said yes, he signed, and I went off to basic training. But it really started because I wanted to do something different. I wanted to get out of my comfort zone. And, my friends didn't really approve of me leaving. They're like, are you crazy? Like, are you going to be back before you graduate? And, all these things and questions kept coming up. But honestly, it was the best best decision I made back in 2007, because going to basic training was literally the best thing that happened to me, not only for my like self-confidence, but for, that young lady that was so lost and had no idea what I was getting into or really what I wanted as a career. And again, coming from a very small town where, high school graduation rate isn't that high, and even going to college is like very low, just because we're from a, low income town. I'm just so thankful that my recruiter at the time, which he was also Hispanic, he's like, listen, I get it. Your parents are not going to understand. You're a girl, but let me talk to them and, kind of show them the opportunities that's available. And, that was really helpful. So that's kind of how I started my journey on, going into this whole new environment that was scary and challenging.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack, and it's crazy that you were like, oh, JROTC, I'll try that, and then it just opened the door to something new. And you said split op, and you also mentioned that you went to basic training, and that was between your junior and senior year of high school?
Correct.
So what was the contract that you got? Because did you do ROTC?
Yes. So the contract was reserves at first. I signed an 8-year contract in the reserves, which included it started when I went to basic training. So on the weekends, when I came back from basic training, I was supposed to go to my unit and report to them once a month. And I did that. And that's when I realized and learned more about ROTC and what that consisted of, which, by the way, I came in as a 92 Golf, which is a cook in the Army, food service specialist, because at the time I only had really 3 options. I could, anything that I wanted to do had to be within 8 weeks. I think no more than 10 weeks of actual individual training, because I was already within my contract, I had that I was going to college. So that was another great reason why I did the 8 years reserve at the beginning, or signed for the 8-year reserves, because I had college within my contract. So then that would allow me to, go the ROTC route if I decided, or just go to a 4-year college to begin with, and then, go from there. But senior year, I discovered Georgia Military College, which was a 2-year early commissioning program. And that's the school that I signed up for. I'm like, this is where I'm going, and I want to commission, and I want to go active duty. Like, that was my goal from after high school.
Okay, so your contract was more that you signed up and then with the intention to go to college, and it wasn't anything really related to ROTC, and you ended up going to a Georgia Military Institute. Is that what you said?
Georgia Military College, yes.
And is it similar to the academy, or is it more laid back?
It's way more laid back because it's a junior college, and it's a 2-year early commissioning program. So typically for any ROTC program, you go to this, I can't remember the name of it now, but I think it's changed either way, where they pretty much assess you on what you've learned in ROTC. And so everyone goes at I think junior and senior year. But with Georgia Military College, you go after your freshman year. So, you're a freshman still going into your sophomore year, you're at camp, and you get tested on everything, on land nav, physical fitness, on your leadership. And so it was very challenging for me, but I think that that's really why I signed up for that program specifically. And again, because it just really inspired me to, do more than the typical ROTC cadet. And at the time, I'll be honest, I did not know about West Point. Again, I had no idea. I wish, again, I knew what I know now. And another reason why I love, what you're doing is because, it's so necessary right now for young women to have mentors that have been in the military, or at least be able to seek someone for information, especially if it's not readily available or they don't have access to it, where they are. Because some of these gals come from a very small school too, kind of like I did.
Yeah, I didn't know a lot about the military either when I joined, and I think that's probably why I'm on this path to help people as they join, because I remember what it was like to not know anything, and to, like you saying, I didn't know about West Point. I'm like, I know what that's like, and one of my really good friends went to West Point, but I didn't understand what that meant. Like, I knew it was a big deal because they had like assembly and they talked about how important it was, but I was just kind of like, okay, like, I don't know why he's doing that. And even though I was around it, I still didn't really quite understand it. And it wasn't until I was in college that I learned about ROTC and then did that. But that sounds like such an interesting program. And so when you graduated, after the 2 years, you commissioned, and did you have your associates?
Yes. So we had to have an associate's in order to commission. And we also had to have a school, 4-year school university that we could go into to finish our bachelor's. And then we had a total of 5 years to finish our bachelor's. So if it took you 2 years to get your associates, have 3 years to finish your bachelor's, which typically, we finish within 4 years. And, thankfully I was able to finish at my 4th year and then get assessed in my 3rd year, really after my 1st year of going to University of North Georgia, which is another military college. Then you get assessed and they let you know, what branch you get, where you're going, and if there are any other schools that you are able to take or, go on as you are, going to your duty station.
And do they pay for your schooling while you're going to school?
So this was the trick, right? At the time, I didn't really, again, know as much. So because it was a 2-year program, my ROTC scholarship only covered the first 2 years. So that was really, where I wish I would have done more research. But thankfully, again, I did have, GI Bill, and I also did have a scholarship prior to actually joining the military. But that's really what helped me, kind of be okay with the other 2 years. But I will say, I did, once I commissioned, I immediately got a job for my 3rd and 4th year because, just gas alone, my groceries, I had to pay, for my room and board. So it was a lot of expenses that I had to cover on my own. And then sometimes even like my books, because only tuition would be covered. I think my GI Bill covered a portion for my books, but I was taking 4 or 5 classes. So I think that was another reason, why I had to work. I remember having 2 jobs at one point because I wanted to make sure that I was, okay financially, but at the same time, focused on my work. So I was, since I can remember, I was always, working, studying, or doing, vice versa. But, again, I'm grateful for those times because it really helped me really be a part of this military community when I went active duty. But yeah, no, it was 2 years that was covered. And then the other 2, I pretty much kind of came out of pocket and, books and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the good things about how the post 9/11 GI Bill has changed, that it like gives you rent, because just having your education bills paid for like at the university doesn't really make it practical to go to school. You still have like other expenses, and so that's what I like about the new GI Bill.
Yeah, no, that's really good too.
And now that it doesn't expire, that's a nice thing too.
I know, right? Yeah. No, yeah. I wish I would have, if I would have had that before, that would have been great. But, after, of course, we did have that as well, which is, the best thing the military has done or DOD has done with supporting education. And like you said, especially that now it doesn't even expire. So that's even a lot better.
Yeah, for sure. So eventually you graduated and then you commissioned and you went active duty. And what was that experience like?
I went active duty a little bit later than I wanted to, and it was for a good reason. So my senior year, my husband and I got married. And the reason we did that, we kind of like planned it all out. So we met at Georgia Military College. We pretty much started a relationship when we first met. And at first I'm like, oh, he's a great guy. Not sure if this is, I don't think I'm going to prioritize a relationship over my career. Right. So I was kind of like, okay, we can make this work. But then our 3rd year, we're like, oh my gosh, this is really happening. Like, we're going to go off and we're never going to see each other again because, with the military, right? He was also military. He had actually commissioned as a logistics officer. And so we got to a point where we're like, oh my gosh, like, we had this conversation at like 20 and he's like, do you want to marry me? And I'm like, I don't know, because I wasn't thinking about settling down. And I'm like, I want to make the military my career. And so we had, I don't know, we're like we've been very mature since the very beginning. It's so funny because we always like joke about this, but we were like 20-year-olds and like 30-year-old bodies. But we just had this conversation and I'm like, yeah, I think this is it. Like, I'm in love. And anyways, long story short, we decided to get married. And, shortly after, we weren't planning it, by the way, I'm pregnant. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm working. I'm a waitress. We're both working at Polo, the clothing store. And we're like, oh my gosh, like this is actually happening. What are we going to do? Like the military. So anywho, thankfully, my professors were very understanding because I graduated in May and my daughter was due in June. But in April, we have all exams and I'm like literally like 8 months and I'm struggling and I'm like, I don't think I'm gonna be able to finish this. So I pretty much, go through all my classes, we graduate, but I can't go active duty until 6 months after she's here, because of the whole, the leave and making sure that you have, now we're both dual military. So we literally go active duty the day that my daughter is born. And we literally said this. So we get to Virginia, we were at Fort Lee and I was pregnant and my husband was supposed to start work the day that my daughter was born. And we literally joked and we're like, watch her get here when you start work. And, because we knew we were going to have her in June. So she got here a couple weeks early. And so he took me to the hospital at like 9 p.m. and he had his PT test, his initial like actual physical test the morning of her being born. And so to this day, we're like, yeah, of course she got here at the right time. So she was born then. So I had to wait a couple months to go active duty, which was great. I got to spend some time with her when she was a baby. But then I immediately, had to leave her behind because of my actual basic officer leadership training. So I did that and it was different. It was a lot different than what I had imagined just because I felt like I wanted to do more, but I couldn't. And by that, I mean mentally and emotionally. I wanted to be with my daughter. I wanted to be with my family. But thankfully, I was able to immediately, have women that were moms within my leadership, within my chain of command. And they were very, very supportive with, listen, you're a new mom. It's okay if you don't get everything right, the first year, but, this is what I recommend you to do. And, that was really, really helpful because I don't think I would have made it my first year. And by that meaning at Fort Bragg, because we were stationed at Fort Bragg, both of us. And with Fort Bragg, there's the 82nd Airborne Division, 18th Airborne Corps, and we were both in 82nd Airborne Division. So it was, training all the time, long days. So, being able to have someone, have another woman, and one of them, she was a command sergeant major. She was in E9. So she had been in for almost 20 years. And, her giving me this advice, when I was like 24, 25, was the best thing that I received because it was hard. I mean, it was really hard my first year, still trying to, define myself as a mom and define myself as a first lieutenant at the time, because since I commissioned early, my time started when I commissioned. So I went in as a first lieutenant, but that was the bad part because everyone expected me to know more, to, I don't want to say be more, but to be a more experienced lieutenant. And so, going in as an O2, I'm like, well, I literally just got here 6 months ago and I'm understanding the Army. I'm understanding my job. And at the same time, I'm trying to get back home to pick up my infant baby because, yeah, she was almost one. But yeah, I mean, it was a lot. It was a lot for my husband. It was a lot for both of us. We both had our hands full. And I think he and I, every time we go back and talk about this, we're like, man, if we made it through that, we can make it through anything, honestly.
Yeah, that's a lot of change to deal with, especially joining the military. My husband and I, we didn't have kids for 6 years and we were both active duty, and like dual military was hard and we didn't have any kids. And then when I got pregnant, we were like, yeah, I'm gonna leave because this is really hard. So I can't even imagine.
Yeah, and there are so many couples too that I'm like, how do you guys make it for so long? We met through seeing each other at daycare, and this couple, I mean, they've been together for, a long time. And they're actually going to retire in the next year or two. And they've been dual military. And I'm like, how do you do this? Like, it's so hard. And, one of the responses that I have received is that, they both want to be in the military. And, that I think that is what's required, right? You want to keep your heart in it. And, for me, I think I realized that I don't want to say not having fun, but I just didn't see myself growing in the way that I wanted to. So I think that's when I'm like, okay, I'd rather, do it now than, grow into this leader that, I don't want to be, right? Because I think you and I would agree, I don't care what branch you're in, there's always going to be good and there's going to be bad leaders, right? And I just didn't want to be that. I didn't want to be this, leader that just, hated her career or didn't do any, of service to their soldiers. So for me, it was just, this is the time for me to pull the plug. And I think you pretty much called it at the right time when you're like, okay, this is hard. And I know probably for you or for really anyone, you didn't leave because it was hard. It was just something that you had to prioritize, right? And I think that for me, that's kind of how it was too. I had to prioritize what I could handle at that time. And that was, my family. Everyone's going to have different things happening in their lives. Like I believe in like everyone goes through a different season at different times. And so I think for me, it was that season of like, okay, Wendi, you have to decide now or it's just going to be decided for you. And I just wanted to do it on my terms, in a way where I felt it was not only a good time, but also a time for me to evolve and kind of be okay with the unknown, because that's really what it is when you're getting out.
Yeah. And how many years did you serve in the military before you got out?
5 years active and then 5 years reserves prior to, with school and going to drill and everything before getting to Fort Bragg. So a total of 10, but 5 active duty. And most of them were at Fort Bragg.
And you were a mom those 5 years.
Yeah.
Before we switch to your transition story, do you have any other experiences that you want to highlight from your time on active duty?
Yeah. Thank you, Amanda, for allowing me to do this. And, one of the things that I've been, talking recently to other women, and as you know, I'm a coach and I have specialized primarily in emotional well-being and, how do we overcome challenges emotionally, right? Because I think most of us can endure a lot, but there are going to be challenges or obstacles that we sometimes feel like we can't get over, or we think that is something that, we can't erase, or we just can't really let go. And for me, it was this challenge in 2013 where, my husband and I had actually had a miscarriage at 20 weeks. And it was detrimental to all of us, to our family, because at that time, not only are we in the military, working really hard and taking care of our daughter, but we really had this idea of, identifying or defining ourselves as like good parents, right? Like I think we all as humans want to be the best parent, want to be the best leader. We want to be the best husband, the best wife. And I think for us, or more specifically for me as a woman, I felt that I had failed at being one, a mom, two, a wife, and three, as a leader, because it all happened so quickly. And at that time, I didn't know this, but I was being really hard on myself. I beat myself up every day because I was thinking, I could have prevented this. This could have been prevented, and I kept blaming myself, and I was self-loathing and so much of my actual suffering that I had that had happened really. And, also being a believer now and before, not that I wasn't, but I really wasn't. I didn't have a relationship with God. And so looking back, for any of you ladies out there, that have suffered, maybe not specifically with a miscarriage or, with a loss, but really with something that's been meaningful that has affected you and your family, maybe a divorce, maybe, you've lost someone, to suicide, someone that you've, lost in a relationship, right? It could just be as simply as not having your family in your life anymore, right? I think, being in the military, that's one of the other challenges that we have. We get isolated from our families, not because we want to, but because it's just the nature of the beast, right? We deploy, we are in training for so long, and we're not, at the family events like we used to all the time. So, whatever that may be for you, what I, want to encourage you to, really focus on is one, knowing that this is life, right? Like, we're going to have obstacles. Something is going to happen. We're going to lose people, especially in the field that we're in, right? We deploy. We know that, we may not make it back. Or, relationships. Yeah, we all want to be married and stay married forever and be happily ever after. But there will be, separations. There will be divorce. And, in the military, the rates are pretty high too. So, not beating yourself up for the things that you can't control. And I know that for me, that's what it was at the time. I thought I could control it, but I couldn't, right? Like, I did everything the doctors told me. I did everything that was recommended at home, by my husband. He was always there, supportive. I'll help you. And, yeah, if you want to go for a walk, whatever you need to get done. And all of these things that I thought in my head that had caused my miscarriage. But at the end of the day, it was just something that was supposed to happen, and it happened to me. And really what I want to express here is that, again, focusing on what you can control, and then also being okay to seek help, right? At that time, I was not okay with that. I'm like, I'm an officer. Who am I to go and get therapy about this? Like, I don't have time for that. And oh, by the way, I want to be an example for my soldiers. Like, I don't want to sit here and just cry and, do all these sad things. I want to just forget it and move on and go back to work. Like, that's all I wanted. And I wish somebody would have pulled me to the side and been like, hey, Wendi, you need to take care of you, which I think they tried. But at that time I was so stubborn, and I'm like, no, I've got this. I'm okay. I don't need therapy. I am going to be fine. And so what I did at that time, I buried all the negative emotion and I kept it like underneath the water. My emotions were this beach ball that I pushed down underneath the water in a pool for a very long time. And a very long time for me was almost over a year. While I was doing that, I hated myself as an individual. I hated myself as a mom. I hated myself as a wife. I beat myself up every day as a leader. Like, you shouldn't have done this. And I just could not even bear to see myself in the mirror because I felt so worthless. And thankfully, I got to a point where I felt so bad and I went through this emotional black hole, and I was like, okay, I think this is it. Like, it's either me calling military one source, or I'm just not going to be able to show up to work, without breaking down, without completely, because I was just so, I felt like I was choking. I just felt so, I don't know, I couldn't breathe anymore because I was holding all of it in. And so again, thankfully, they connected me with a therapist, and, that's where I cried every session. I told her everything, and, thankfully she was really good at what she did. And, she connected me with other specialists, that really specialize in miscarriages and, the very, professional people that understand what that really looks like, because it's a loss you don't see coming, especially when you're 20 weeks. You're like, oh, I'm planning for, the room, everything, that all the logistics that come with it, the name and all of that. So anywho, and after that, I realized I started taking baby steps on, how am I going to get better from this? How am I going to forgive myself? One, that I had treated myself so badly. And two, how am I going to be able to express myself and talk about this to other women? Because I think for me, I just felt really alone. And at the time, I didn't know this, but I was just blaming everyone, myself, the military. I was blaming everything that was involved during that time. And it just didn't help. I just became another person. I just became very focused on, mission and career, because that was the only way that I would somehow forget. Because even going home, I would sometimes cry on the way home, because I'm like, I'm not deserving to be a mother. Like, my 2-year-old shouldn't have to, have this person that can't take care of herself, be mom. Yeah, I mean, going to therapy changed everything. And then I got coaching because I felt that I needed a way to manage that negative emotion when it did come up. Because, I mean, it's like any other loss, right? You'll have those moments when you're like, oh, I remember those dark days. I remember, how it felt. And yeah, so again, just seeking help, I think, is the number one thing.
Yeah, that sounds so hard. And I think that a lot more people are talking about miscarriage today than they were 10 years ago. And just even getting mental health help. Like when I got home from my deployment, it was like everyone was like, you have to be okay. And like you went and saw all the doctors, but you knew how to answer their questions because you didn't want to be the person. And like it's like the military knew that there was something wrong, but they also weren't addressing it in the right way, because I actually opened up and told the tech what I was experiencing, and she turned around and told me, you need to tell the doctor that. And I was like, oh crap. And then I didn't tell the doctor. And I was like, even today, I feel there was a disservice because I opened up to her because she was a woman, and she should have told the doctor. I should have had to repeat it. Like, why'd she ask me those questions?
Right. Yeah.
And like, why didn't she give the doctors a heads up? Like, she needs